Hi, welcome to Quilt Talk episode 3. Today I have a project update for my Easter egg hunt quilts triangles extravaganza collection. There's so many of those triangles I've been working my way through. So small update for that, and I have 2 new project starts for Valentine's Day. So get started. Okay, so for the Easter egg hunt quilt, I have torn all of the papers off all of the blocks, and these are the last of the blocks that I still need to iron and open. I thought that I would try to get through that so I could see how many of each color I have, because it's kind of a mystery until I iron them. And so up in my sewing room, I have them laid out by approximate color. So for instance, all of the gold blocks I have in a stack, and all of the green and the different colors of pink. That way, when I go to make some of the scrappy blocks that I'm going to work on next, I can kind of see how much of each color I have. So I sewed one block here though, and this is the garnet quilt block from the Fat Quarter Shop's Triangles on a Roll book. And this is a lot bigger than the quilt block in the book because I used the 4.5-inch squares instead of, I think, the 2.5-inch squares it called for. So just a very massive block, but I really like how it came out. I did have to go into my stash to find some coordinating pieces to go with it. So I had a couple of fat quarters of this and this that were left over from the collections that I didn't use in the triangle paper. And this is actually some leftover fabric from a skirt I sewed a couple years ago. And this is just Hobby Lobby fabric, and I thought it went okay with the gold. From a distance, it doesn't look like it's too different. And that's one thing I'm going to have to kind of pay attention to as I pick blocks for these other scrappy blocks that I want to do, is that some of them do require, I guess what will be 4.5-inch squares to go with it. And so I have to kind of be mindful of backgrounds and some of these that I can choose for the blocks. But I think it's came out nicely. I like the colors, and I will be making more of these type blocks in the next week now that I am through all of the triangle paper. We'll say the triangle paper did kind of grow on me as I was sewing with it. It was definitely nice to have really accurate squares, although as I'm sewing it, I'm noticing I do have to be careful when I'm pressing them open, and just making sure that I'm paying attention to my 1/4-inch seam allowance, because like any block, like the more that little things are off, sometimes it can add up on big blocks like this. But that one is done, and I'll be making more of those type blocks in the next week. And it feels good to be down to just a couple of these. Honestly, I just kind of got into a routine where I would just sit and just tear paper for a little bit, and then I just been keeping these by the iron, and I'll just put through a stack at a time between other things. And it's honestly coming along quite quickly. At the beginning of the week, I was working on this as for my Leader and Ender project. This will eventually become some kind of project bag when I get on a project bag kick in a couple months. So this is Moda Wild and Free, and this is just a little one of these 2.5-inch squares. I always forget what they're called. Mini charm that I got years ago, and sewed them together. Has lots of really pretty pinks and blues, a lot of directional prints, so I have to be more careful when I'm throwing them together to pay attention to that, because that was a little bit challenging when I was trying to piece some of these to make sure that I didn't have like some of them sideways. And it's interesting how sometimes the scale of the prints don't always lend themselves to mini charms, but honestly, it'll be a cute project bag at some point. So I've got 4 of those, and I'm just putting these in a box for now until I get to that. Maybe eventually, if I like making project bags, maybe I will make them for an Etsy or something, but for now I'm just kind of keeping them aside. The other one I did, I got all excited when I tore the label when I took it off. And this is Ahoy Me Hearties by Moda, and this is by Janet Claire. And I really liked every single one of the fabrics in this particular collection. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut squares out of this fabric and piece them, and this will also probably be a project bag. I'm thinking it could be like a nice like knitting bag within a notion bag inside is kind of what I'm thinking. Anyway, I really liked how all of these fabrics looked. I like the colors. Like this is definitely, I mean, I don't necessarily gravitate towards nautical, but I really like the color scheme here, and I feel like all of them were nice SKUs. Because sometimes I've noticed with pre-cut bundles and fat quarters, sometimes the colors are really pretty, but then if you look at the individual fabric, sometimes they're not always as nice, or the individual fabric themselves might be a little bit not as, I don't know, I don't want to call them ugly, but sometimes it's not always as nice as they play into the overall scheme of something, but not individually. But anyway, I liked all of these, and I will be cutting these and that other fabric and making them into something. So I'll show that next time once it's done. And this had some left over from the other bundle, because there's always seems to be like this odd squares out. So I just keep those and they'll go in the next one. It's kind of how I look at it. And then eventually, if I have a lot of these left over, they can go in a scrap quilt. So that takes care of that. I will say that I think I am a convert to these project boards. I love them. I like it's so easy. Like when I'm cutting a block, to be able to lay them out, and then I can carry it around. And I'm actually going to be trying to make some, because I bought this one. This is just like one of the Lori whole ones. It's the 16-inch size. But I bought some poster board off of Amazon, and I'm going to try to make some and see how that goes. But I kind of wanted to look at one and see how they looked officially before I tried that on my own. So now I have a couple of project starts. So last week I showed a couple of my collections of Valentine's fabric, and I was thinking about starting something, and someone was very helpful in the comments and said, just do it. So I was the direction follower, and I started 2 quilts. So the first one is the Hearts at Home quilt, and I've had this pattern forever. This is Chelsea Stratton Designs, and these blocks are big. They don't look big in the picture, but they're big. And this is designed for 2 jelly rolls. I only had 1 jelly roll, and I'm going to be trying to insert pictures as I go here. But I think it's the Serenity. It was one of their Valentine's lines from a couple years ago. Honestly, I think for more variety, if you had 2 jelly rolls from the same designer, so they all worked well together, I think that would work really well. But I had a lot of leftover fabrics from other lines that went together, so I went through my stash and I pulled anything that was Sherry and Chelsea fabric and put it in a pile, and then that way, as I was cutting the blocks for the different colors, I could just pull as I needed. I originally I sat down with like a sticky note, and I converted the particular jelly roll, like the dark purple to blue. Like I went down the chart and just kind of made sure that I was counting out the correct number of blocks. And then I altered my plan as I saw how it actually worked out, because I ended up, like my original plan, I wasn't planning on doing like a neutral block, and ended up having 2 neutral blocks. But so I got everything cut. Let me show you some of that. Since this is on top, I'll show this first. But this is the fabric I'm planning on using for the binding. This is just from my purple scrap bin, and I will be using these just to kind of use them up as a scrappy binding. And so that's my plan. So I'd have that in a pile so that I can turn these into an actual binding. And whatever leftover I have from these, I will use for the project boards. But anyway, so here is my test block. Because I always try to sew a test block, especially if I'm doing an entire quilt with one type of block. That way I can teach myself how to do it before I do it 16 times. And I'm glad I did that on this one. This is my first time doing an entire quilt with log cabin blocks. I've done a block or 2 for scrappy quilts before. But so one problem that I had is that when I was sewing, I wasn't paying attention, and I accidentally sewed one of the blue ones on the wrong side and didn't notice it until I went to put on the next piece, and it wasn't working out. So what I was able to figure out by doing a practice block is that when you're sewing a log cabin block, there's always these spots, I don't know if I can articulate this well, but where when you're going to pin the next piece, where you have 2 seams. And so I just taught myself to look for the 2 seams when I was pinning. So like if I went the wrong way and there was not a second seam, I don't know if I can find a good example of that. But like here, like there's only 1 seam. So if I'm trying to pin a piece to that, I know I'm doing it wrong. So I was able to kind of work that out, and that helped me keep my blocks organized. And this is just scraps from my medium blue bin, and then I picked a scrap for the heart, and just random scraps from, I think I had a jelly roll. And I'm not sure if this was Zen Cheek or what this particular jelly roll was, but I'm not sure that it's 100% cotton. It almost felt like, I don't know, like some kind of rayon blend or something. But anyway, this is my test block, and that'll go in my scrap quilt one day. One thing that I figured out when I was sewing the heart blocks in the middle, because you use the method where you pin and cut the triangles off, is that it's actually big enough to salvage some triangles. So what I decided to do is I marked, and I used the Font and Porter tool. It's like a little plot tool. I should have a picture somewhere in here of it. And what I ended up doing was I make sure I marked the straight line because sewing this block was the priority. And then I used the tool to mark where I would cut the second one. That way I could just sew both at the same time. I hope I'm explaining this well. But that way I could sew both at the same time rather than have all of these little cutoffs to have to try and sew together later. I sewed it at the same time, and that way I could just cut it. And then I had all of these little squares. These are my extras. And I actually sewed another block just from something that would have been trash otherwise. And so here is the block that I sewed. And this is the sapphire block from the Fat Quarter Shop's Triangle in a Row book. I ended up turning the dark pink just to make it work. And I'm thinking like a few little things where they're not perfect. I don't have a ton of experience sewing with super tiny squares, and I probably should have pressed the block open here. Here, I'll show the back because this is real quilt talk, and this is what it really looks like on the back. I feel like some of these I should have pressed open. And honestly, I probably should have trimmed and made sure everything was the same size. But honestly, like when this is in a quilt with a whole bunch of other squares, no one's going to notice that some of those seams are not perfectly aligned. And my plan is, because this kind of came out as an odd size, it's like 7 inches, is I will sew plain background fabric around it and then trim it. So when I do get to piecing this in a larger sample quilt, I will make it into probably a 9-inch finished block or a 12-inch, or however I decide to do it. But anyway, this is just all from the scraps, and I liked that method of sewing them at the same time because then I don't end up with random fabric floating around my craft room. But anyway, I think honestly, if I had just done a 9 patch instead of trying to do like this giant one, it probably would have came out a little better as far as like making sure everything matched. But honestly, like that's good enough, and it's trash. What do they call it? Making trash from treasure. And so here we go. So here's my sample blocks, and then now let me show you the actual blocks. Oh, before I do that, here is the fabric that I'm using for sashing and for the little, let's see, what do they call it on here? There's an official name for it. The posts. So I liked this purple the best in the jelly roll, and so I thought I would use that for the little posts. But anyway, I picked mostly, I think most of this is the same color, or there's slight variance. And I'm noticing, because I have quite a collection of different background fabrics in my stash, that it is a little bit difficult to match white on whites. I feel like the different brands have different tones, and that kind of adds to the challenge. But I feel like since I was going for an overall scrappy theme, it is what it is, and it's fine. So let me show you some blocks. So here's the purple block, and I have different scraps for the center. I tried to make sure that the heart matched on both sides, and I tried to use all of the strips, as many as I could, that came from the actual jelly roll. I did end up with a few leftover pieces, but I just try to blend from my stash from things that I thought would work okay. But I got these sewed up this week. It's a lot of sewing. I mean, it's very simple sewing, but you have to stop after every row, and you have to iron and pin. Although I didn't pin the last one. I was in a hurry this morning because the sun was coming up, and I knew so would my little one. But honestly, by the end, it was just straight sewing, and it went okay. So there's a couple of each kind, but I tried to make them scrappy. I suppose if you were working from stash or working from more than one jelly roll, you could get more variety. But I mean, the goal was to use the jelly roll, and I feel like that is accomplished. One thing I will notice, and you'll probably notice on this one, is that I tried to group things by like apricot and medium pink, but in the early pre-dawn light in my sewing room, there was a couple of blocks where I accidentally mixed up pinks, and they got sewn on the wrong one. But oh well, it's just a design feature. We'll pretend like I did that on purpose. But anyway, lots of gorgeous blocks. It'll be fun. I will get this piece together this week. I think this week I'm going to be doing a lot of working with like the bigger pieces. I've got lots of long rows to sew. And then I tried to, I don't know, pair some of the different color middle hearts with the outside. That way one wouldn't overwhelm the other. But anyway, it should be really pretty. It's a good stash buster. Oh, here's the one I tried where I tried the more medium or low volume as part of it. And I'm not sure. I mean, you can definitely tell like this is lighter than this side, but it's kind of an experiment. I wanted to use all of it. And so it's pretty much similar. But I really like all of these colors. You see the medium pink ended up in the wrong block. It's just how it goes sometimes. Here's some of the reds. I think this one, yeah, this is another one where the reds look the same. Although some of them, the color blocking was kind of approximate when I was sorting out the piles, where there wasn't like a clear cut, like this goes to this pile. I mean, like the purples were, but, and honestly, like even if you can't find the jelly roll from their Valentine's collection, if you were to pull like some of the reds, the purples, the apricots, you could probably find fabrics that are similar from other collections and just kind of make your own blend. Honestly, I kind of like the scrappy ones. So the other thing I decided to do was I had 2 fat quarter bundles, and I decided to do a 5-inch square quilt. I figured that'd be a really fun kind of like leader and ender quilt, especially because I'm going to be sewing a lot of really long rows here in the next week. So having like a little breaks built in where I can just kind of sew stuff real quick and play with fabrics, I thought would be a good idea. So I'm doing a Valentine's Day scrappy quilt. And I had 2 fat quarter bundles, but I decided to just do the Mint for You fat quarter bundle. And what I started with before I even did that is I went through my stash, and I have my stash in baskets by color. And so I pulled from the purple bin, which I don't have a ton of purple fabric. So I pulled from purple, from the red, from the like the more medium pinks and the apricot pinks. And then some from just a little bit from like the low volume things that kind of had like the floral theme. And I had a color palette in mind of what I wanted to do, like very Valentine's, very bright. And I just pulled fabrics. So the first thing I do when I'm, and hopefully I'm showing pictures as I talk. So the first thing I do is I just pull things that are already cut. So if I've already cut down layer cakes, or if I already have the charm packs broken apart, and I just look for those. And typically what I'll do is, this is my inner kindergarten first grade teacher coming out, is I will make groups of 10. So I will just make little stacks of 10. And then when I get 10 stacks, I bundle them and make 100. And I was looking, actually, I wasn't sure when I started what size quilt I would want to make. I wasn't sure how much fabric, just like a very organic process. And so I wrote down some of the different sizes and how many blocks I would need, and ended up going for 400 charm squares. And so I just kept going until I ended up with 4 piles of 100. And because I was cutting from a fat quarter bundle, I knew that those colors would have a lot more of each particular fabric. So those I'm trying to be really intentional when I'm sewing, to make sure that I'm matching them with as many varieties of fabrics. That way, hopefully I don't get to the end and end up with like 16 of the same, because that's what's left. So anyway, so let me show you some of the fabrics. So here's what I have left of the ones I have not sewn so far. And so here's what I mean by I have some of the ones where there's a lot more of the same fabric just kind of piled together. And so this goes in one pile. I had a lot of these like red and pinky red batiks. So these are kind of another pile. And then these are just like scraps. And what I tried to do, and I probably showed the pictures where I have my piles of 10, is I don't necessarily have 10 of the same scrap, but I tried to keep some of the same color value together. So like I would try to have a pile of 10 low volume, 10 medium pinks. That way when I'm working through my pile, I can kind of pull from the similar colors. And if I felt like I've used a lot of one color, I can just kind of move the pile somewhere else in here. Anyway, so here's a whole bunch of the fabrics. And this is literally what I have sitting next to my machine, and I just pull from this and sew. And then I try to be, I mean, this is where I think it's really fun to do a project like this, where I try to pull colors that look good together. So for instance, like I feel like the red from the cherries look really good with this batik, so I sewed those together. I thought this was a cute combo. So it's just fun. Like I just enjoy playing with the color. And some of these I just try to mix and match. The ones where I know I have a lot of, I'm not going to show you all of them, but just trying to play with different values. I try not to put, like I don't want to put 2 medium pinks together. I know when I piece the entire quilt, they're going to end up together, but as much as I can control it now, I'm just trying to keep them separated. And you can just kind of see like where if I have a lot of the same fabric, I am trying to split them up as best I can. And then there's some darker purples mixed in. Lunch is ready. And anyway, so I just have a whole stack of these, and I'm going to sew through all of them first to get them all to pairs of 2, and then I will start to put these into 4 patches, I think. I've tried doing it before where I do really long rows, and that can get kind of unwieldy, so I think I'm going to turn them into 4 patches and then just kind of continue to block sew them together. The other reason why I chose 400 squares is when I was planning out my project, I started with a set of 4 and then turned it into a set of 16 and then kind of multiplied it out. Because for me, one of the most annoying things is like, and this is the annoying thing about 9 patches for me, is that you always have to make sure you keep 1/3 of your squares for the next set, if that makes sense, because you don't want to sew everything and then realize that you end up with a weird number. So it had to be something divisible by 2 and by 4, and that way it would work nicely. Here, and then when I was cutting the fat quarters, here, see if I can look from my notes here. I was able to, from the fat quarters, I was able to get 3 strips of 5-inch for the squares, and then there was 1 2.5-inch strip, and then like a little bit of leftover. So my plan is this will have a scrappy binding. There was actually 2 of the fat quarters I kind of pulled out because I wasn't sure if I was going to need them for the squares, and I thought that if something was going to go into stash, I wanted it to not be like obviously Valentine's fabrics. But I ended up using these for the binding. So I cut, I think, 1 set of these for the quilt with the 5-inch squares, and the rest are going to be in the binding. And so I just have all of these fat quarter length. It's supposed to be a really scrappy binding. All of these fat quarter length leftovers just from cutting, and so it'll be a scrappy binding. It'll all go together, and it'll have like more of these colors because I have more of them. And I didn't really want these to go back into stash. I wanted them all out. And I'm so anyway, so those are my projects from this week. I think next week will be a lot of working on some of these bigger pieces and working on the Easter egg hunt quilt. And anyway, I'm loving the colors. I feel like this was a nice break to work with some bright pinks and purples. And I love working on like scrappy projects like this. So anyway, I think that's all for this week.